The knife moved with practiced precision through the deer's hide, separating meat from bone with the efficiency of 10 years' solitude. Elara's hands, calloused and scarred, worked in the amber glow of her cabin's single oil lamp while wind howled through the pines outside. This was the rhythm of survival. Hunt, clean, preserve, repeat. No room for softness, no space for memory. But memory came anyway, uninvited as always. She had been 18 when they drove her from Ashwood Pack, young enough to still believe in justice, old enough to understand betrayal. The test had been public, as Alpha Thornwood intended. The entire pack gathered in the ceremonial circle while he dragged forward a young Omega woman, barely 16, her face already swelling from the beating she had endured. One of Thornwood's beta enforcers stood beside the girl, drunk and sneering, his intentions written in every cruel line of his face. "Calm her," Thornwood had commanded. "Use your gift. Prove you belong here." Elara had tried. She had placed her hands on the girl's shoulders, had reached for that warm current of peace every Omega was supposed to possess. But nothing came. No soothing energy, no calming presence, only her own rising panic as the beta laughed and grabbed the girl again. The pack had watched in silence as Elara failed, watched as the beta struck her when she tried to intervene, watched as she fell, blood streaming from the gash above her eye that would leave a permanent scar. Her parents had stood among them, heads bowed, as if her failure shamed them more than the violence unfolding before their eyes. Only one person had moved. Lyria, daughter of the general, had stepped forward with food and a blanket when they dragged Elara to the border. Her father, Thornwood himself, had struck her unconscious for that kindness. 2 years later, Lyria would die protecting another defective Omega, murdered by her own father for choosing compassion over compliance. The knife stilled in Elara's hand. She forced the memories back into their familiar cage and returned to her work. The deer wouldn't butcher itself, and winter was coming fast to the border territories. That was when she heard it. A sound that didn't belong to wind or wildlife. The metallic tang of blood carried on the night air, copper and iron mixed with something else, something that made the hair rise on the back of her neck. Silver. Elara set down the knife and reached for the bow hanging beside her door. 12 arrows, all tipped with silver she had traded a year's worth of pelts to obtain. Her fingers found the familiar grip as she stepped into the darkness beyond her cabin's threshold. The forest pressed close here, a wall of shadow and whisper that had been her only companion for a decade. The blood trail was easy to follow. Too easy. Whatever left it was either dying or wanted to be found. Elara moved through the underbrush with the silence of long practice, bow raised, every sense straining against the night. She found him at the base of an ancient oak, and for a moment her mind refused to process what her eyes reported. The wolf was massive, black as midnight, its fur matted with blood that looked black in the moonlight. But it was the wounds that stopped her breath. A silver blade, 12 inches of cruel metal, protruded from between his ribs. An arrow, its fletching marked with poison she recognized from her grandmother's warnings, jutted from his shoulder. And his left hind leg was caught in a trap, steel jaws buried so deep she could see white bone gleaming through torn flesh. This was not a wounded animal. This was an executed prisoner who had somehow refused to die. The wolf's eyes opened, not yellow like a natural wolf, but amber with an inner fire that spoke of intelligence and will, of humanity barely contained within fur and fang. He looked at her, and in that gaze she saw something that should not exist in a creature so close to death. Recognition and warning. "Stay away," those eyes said. "Let me die alone." Elara's grip tightened on her bow. Every instinct screamed at her to retreat to her cabin, bar the door, and forget what she had seen. Werewolf business was not her concern. She had learned that lesson with blood and exile 10 years ago. But her grandmother's pendant grew warm against her skin. The silver wolf with its blue moonstone eyes seemed to pulse with heat, and words spoken long ago echoed in her mind. The quiet ones see what others miss. Your strength lies where others perceive weakness. She lowered the bow. The wolf's lips pulled back in a snarl as she approached, a warning that would have sent any sensible creature running. But Elara had survived a decade in territories that killed ordinary wolves. Sensible was a luxury she could not afford. "I am going to help you," she said quietly, "and you are going to let me." The wolf tried to snap at her, but the movement cost him. He shuddered, and for a terrible moment she thought he might die right there. His breathing stopped, his eyes went glassy. The magnificent body that had fought so hard to survive simply stopped fighting. No. Elara dropped to her knees beside him, her hands moving with desperate speed. She had studied her grandmother's medical texts, had practiced on every injured creature the forest had offered her. She knew the signs of clinical death, and she knew the narrow window before death became permanent. The silver blade came out first. She gripped it with both hands, ignoring the burn against her palms, and pulled. The wolf's body jerked, a scream trapped in a throat that should not be able to make sound. But he screamed anyway, the sound halfway between human and animal, agony made audible. He was still alive, barely. The arrow next. She could see the poison spreading through his veins, dark lines radiating from the wound. Without hesitation, Elara put her mouth to the injury and sucked. The taste was bitter, caustic, a burning that spread through her mouth and throat. She spat and sucked again, drawing as much of the toxin as she dared before her own system would be compromised. The trap required tools. She ran back to her cabin, grabbed her crowbar and medical kit, and returned to find he had shifted. The transformation must have been involuntary, a body seeking any form that might improve its chances of survival. Where the wolf had been, a man now lay. He was older than she expected, perhaps 35, though pain and trauma aged him in ways that were hard to measure. His face was carved from sharp angles, aristocratic bones beneath the blood and dirt. Scars traced his body, telling stories of battles fought and survived. His black hair was matted to his skull with sweat and worse things, and his eyes, when they flickered open, held that same amber fire. "Kill me," he rasped. "Don't let them take me alive." "Shut up," Elara said, working the crowbar into the trap's mechanism. "I didn't save you so you could die from talking." The trap released with a metallic snap. The man's leg was destroyed, bone shattered in multiple places. Elara began the brutal work of setting it, ignoring his screams as she aligned fragments and wrapped the limb in splints fashioned from branches and strips torn from her shirt. She had one more tool in her medical arsenal, something her grandmother had taught her to build from scavenged batteries and copper wire, a crude device that could deliver an electric shock strong enough to restart a failing heart. She positioned the leads against his chest, over the wound where she had removed the blade. "This will hurt," she warned. "Everything hurts," he whispered. She pressed the trigger. His body arced off the ground, every muscle contracting at once. She pressed again and again. On the fourth shock, his heart found its rhythm. His breathing steadied. Color began to return to his face, though calling it color was generous. He looked like death warmed over, which was accurate enough. "Who are you?" she asked as she began cleaning his wounds. His eyes focused on her with effort. "Cassian," he said, "Alpha King of the North March Territories." The name hit her like a physical blow. She knew that name. Every wolf in the northern regions knew that name. The Reformer, the king who had tried to change laws protecting Omegas, the ruler who had made enemies of every alpha who valued tradition over progress. "And you are?" he asked. "Elara, of Ashwood Pack." She hesitated, then added, "I was exiled 10 years ago, deemed defective." Something flickered across his ravaged face. Sympathy, perhaps, or recognition of a kindred spirit. Thornwood's territory. He is one of the few who did not attend the ceremony last night. "What ceremony?" "The autumn moon gathering, where all alphas pledge loyalty to the crown." His mouth twisted bitterly. "Where my uncle Valdis and my own beta chose to pledge their knives instead." Elara worked in silence, processing this information as she stitched the worst of his wounds. A coup. Not just a personal vendetta, but a coordinated attack on the crown. The implications spread through her mind like cracks through ice. "How many were involved?" she asked. Cassian's laugh was hollow. 8 of the 12 major packs, my beta, Corvus, the man I trusted with my life, poisoned my entire royal guard during the ceremony. Valdis and his conspirators attacked while my warriors died choking on their own blood. "And you escaped?" "Barely. I killed 2 of Valdis's sons before they put silver through my ribs, shifted despite the poisoning and ran." His eyes met hers, and she saw the weight of guilt there. 30 of my loyal wolves survived the initial attack. They are scattered now, hunted like animals. There was more. She could see it in the way he held himself, in the ghosts that haunted his gaze. But before she could ask, a sound froze them both. Howls, multiple voices raised in a hunting call. Close, too close. They followed the blood, Cassian said quietly. They always follow the blood. How many? At least 15, led by Kael, Valdis's daughter. She is thorough. Elara's mind raced through options. Her cabin had defenses, traps she had spent years laying around the perimeter, wards that would slow wolves, if not stop them entirely. But against 15 trained warriors, even with surprise on her side, the odds were suicidal. "Can you stand?" she asked. Cassian pushed himself upright with visible effort. Every movement cost him, but he made it to his feet and stayed there. Barely. Together they made their way back to the cabin. Elara activated the wards with whispered words her grandmother had taught her, phrases in a language older than the wolf packs. Blue light flickered briefly around the cabin's perimeter, invisible to normal eyes, but obvious enough to any werewolf who came close. "They will know you are here," Cassian said. "Let them know." Elara was already moving through her cabin, gathering weapons, checking traps. Her bow, silver-tipped arrows, knives, wolfsbane powder in paper packets that would burst into choking clouds. And one last thing, a vial of liquid she had spent months perfecting. A scent-masking agent that would make anyone who drank it smell like whoever touched them last. "Drink this," she said, pressing the vial into Cassian's hand. "What is it?" "Trust," she said simply. He drank without further question, which spoke volumes about his desperation. Elara took the empty vial and rubbed her hands over his shoulders, his neck, his face. The potion was already working. His scent changed, becoming her scent. To any wolf tracking him, he would smell like her now, like home fires and herbs and human woman. The howls came again, much closer now. Elara could make out individual voices, 15 as Cassian had said, maybe 16. Heavy footsteps crunched through the frost outside, then silence, the kind of silence that preceded violence. A voice rang out, female and sharp as broken glass. "Elara of Ashwood, we know you harbor the traitor king. Surrender him or we burn you out." Elara moved to the window and pulled back the shutters just enough to see. Wolves surrounded her cabin in a loose semicircle. Most were in human form, armed with silver weapons. A few remained as wolves, massive shapes in the moonlight. And at their center stood a woman who could only be Kael. She was tall, built like a warrior, with a scar that bisected her face from forehead to jaw. Her eyes were cold, fanatical, the eyes of a true believer who would burn the world to prove her faith. "There is no one here but me," Elara called back. "You have no business on my land." "We tracked his blood to your door," Kael replied. "Don't insult me with lies, Omega. Give him up and you will be spared. Resist and you die with him." Elara glanced at Cassian. He had positioned himself beside the north window, moving with the silent efficiency of a warrior despite his injuries. He caught her eye and made a series of hand signals. 2 approaching from the north, 3 on the east, reinforcements on the west ridge. She nodded, understanding. Her hands moved to the first of her prepared defenses. A leather cord connected to a series of silver wire snares buried in the ground outside. One pull would trigger them all. "Last chance, Omega," Kael called. Elara pulled the cord. The night exploded with screams. 3 of the wolves, those who had been creeping closer under cover of Kael's negotiations, found themselves caught in snares that tightened around their legs and necks. Silver wire cut deep, burning werewolf flesh with the efficiency of hot iron. One of them, a young male, shifted involuntarily in his panic. The snare decapitated him. "Now," Cassian said. Elara grabbed her bow and moved to the east window. She fired without hesitation, without mercy. The first arrow took a wolf in the throat, the second in the eye. The third glanced off armor, but the fourth found the gap and buried itself in a heart. Return fire came immediately. Not arrows, but something worse. Fire. They were throwing torches at the cabin roof, trying to smoke them out. Within seconds, flames began to spread across the old wood. "We need to move," Cassian said. His voice was strained but steady. "North wall is weakest. They will breach there." Before Elara could respond, the north wall exploded inward, not from axes or rams, but from a massive wolf in full fury. The beast crashed through timber and plaster, snarling, eyes fixed on Cassian. Kael had shifted and come in person. Cassian moved to intercept, but his injuries slowed him. Kale's jaws closed on his shoulder, driving him back against the far wall. Blood sprayed, fresh wounds opened over old ones. Elara did not think, did not plan. She simply acted. She threw herself at Kale, wrapped her arms around the massive wolf's neck, and screamed. But this was not a scream of fear or pain. This was something else entirely. Something that came from deep in her chest, from a place she had never accessed before. The sound was physical, a pressure wave that expanded outward with visible force. Kale's eyes went wide. She released Cassian and staggered back, whimpering, paws over her ears. Every wolf within 50 feet of the cabin dropped to the ground as if struck. The sound continued, rising in pitch and intensity, until even the fire seemed to draw back from its fury. Then Elara's voice gave out. She collapsed, gasping, blood streaming from her nose, but the damage was done. Kale shifted back to human form, naked and bleeding from her ears, and retreated with her remaining warriors. 7 of their number lay dead or dying in Elara's yard. The cabin burned behind them, but the hunters were gone. Cassian caught Elara before she hit the floor. "What was that?" he demanded. That was not Omega calming. That was Omega wrath. A war gift. How? Elara's vision swam. Through the haze, she saw his face, saw the shock and growing understanding there. "I am not defective," she whispered. "I am a recessive warrior Omega. That is why Thornwood exiled me. He knew what I was, what I could become. Warrior Omegas were thought extinct, purged 200 years ago by alphas who feared them. They were the protectors of packs, not the soothers. They could fight like alphas, but possess the strategic minds of Omegas. A perfect balance of violence and wisdom. Too perfect. Too threatening to the established order. The roof groaned above them. Flames were eating through the support beams. "We have to go," Cassian said. He pulled her to her feet, supporting most of her weight. "Can you walk?" "I can run," Elara said, though she was not sure it was true. They stumbled into the night, leaving her burning cabin behind. Elara led them not into the forest, but toward a hidden root cellar she had dug her first year in exile. The door was concealed beneath fallen leaves and old timber. She pulled it open, and they descended into darkness. The tunnel beyond was narrow, barely wide enough for Cassian's shoulders. It ran underground for nearly a quarter mile before emerging in a cave beside a stream. Elara had spent months digging it, planning for exactly this scenario, a final escape route if the world came for her again. They collapsed in this cave's mouth, both bleeding, both exhausted beyond measure. Outside, they could hear Kale's wolves howling in frustration, searching, but the tunnel was well hidden, and the stream would wash away their scent. Cassian looked at her in the dim light that filtered through cracks in the cave ceiling. "You saved my life. Again." "You would have done the same," Elara said. "Would I?" His expression was haunted. "I have failed everyone who trusted me. My mate is dead. My son is missing. My kingdom is in the hands of traitors. Why should you believe I am worth saving?" Elara met his eyes. "Because you are still fighting. Still here. That is not failure. That is survival." For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Cassian asked, "Your mate?" "Killed 3 years ago. Murdered, I now understand." He had thought it an accident, a diplomatic mission gone wrong. But it was Valdis. It was always Valdis, removing threats to his eventual coup. "Your son," Elara said carefully. "How old?" 6. His name is Theron. Valdis holds him hostage in Iron Keep. It is the only reason I have not simply surrendered and been done with it. Then we rescue him." Cassian laughed, bitter and broken. "We? An exiled Omega and a dying king? Against Valdis's armies?" Elara thought of Lyria, thought of 10 years alone, thought of the warrior Omega blood that flowed in her veins, dormant no longer. "Yes," she said, "we—" Before Cassian could respond, a sound made them both freeze. Not wolves this time. Footsteps. Human. Approaching the cave with purpose. Elara's hand found her knife. Cassian, weaponless, positioned himself despite his wounds. They waited in the shadows as a figure emerged into the pale light. It was an older woman, perhaps 50, with iron-gray hair and the bearing of a soldier. She wore the marks of battle, fresh blood on her armor, and a bow in her hands. The bow was aimed directly at them. "One wrong move and I put an arrow through your throat," the woman said calmly. Cassian shifted slightly, angling his body to shield Elara, a gesture that did not go unnoticed by either woman. "We mean no harm," Elara said, raising her hand slowly. "We are just trying to stay alive." The woman lowered her bow a fraction. Elara? Of Silver Creek? The use of her old name, her real pack name before Thornwood had erased it, sent shock through her system. How do you know me? My daughter spoke of you often. The woman's voice softened with old grief. Before she died. I am Senna, once of Ashwood Pack, now of no pack. And you, she continued, her gaze shifting to Cassian, are the reason we are all here. Cassian straightened, somehow managing to project authority despite his naked, bleeding state. You remain loyal, then, until death, Senna replied without hesitation. As do others. We have been searching for you since word of the coup reached us, but we must move quickly. Valdis's hunters are combing these woods, and they have silver weapons. How many loyal wolves remain? Cassian asked. 50, perhaps 60. Scattered, hiding. Some were killed in the initial fighting. Senna's expression darkened. Your Beta Corvus is thorough in his treachery. His betrayal will be addressed when I reclaim my throne, Cassian said, his voice like ice. Elara looked between them, pieces falling into place. You were heading to Moonstone Sanctuary. Senna's sharp gaze returned to her. How do you know of that place? I told her, Cassian said before Elara could answer. She has earned my trust. She saved my life and has proven her worth in battle. The declaration, simple as it was, sent unexpected warmth through Elara. After 10 years of exile, of being deemed worthless, the Alpha King's trust was no small thing. Then we share the same destination, Senna said. She moved toward the cave entrance, gesturing for them to follow. My companions wait a mile upstream with horses. Can you travel, my king? Cassian nodded, though Elara could see the effort it cost him to appear strong. Lead the way. As Senna turned to go, Elara caught Cassian's arm. You are not strong enough for this journey. I don't have a choice, he replied. His eyes met hers, fierce and determined. But I would have you continue with us if you are willing. Your healing skills may be the difference between life and death in the days ahead. It was not quite a request. Alpha Kings did not make requests, but it was closer than she had expected. The realization that he valued her help, defective Omega though she was, stirred something long dormant within her. I will need supplies for my cabin, Elara said. Herbs, bandages, my grandmother's remedies. Too dangerous, Senna cut in. Valdis's men will be watching your home now. Then we will have to find what we need along the way. Elara made a mental inventory of the medicinal plants that would be growing in the autumn forest. It would be challenging, but not impossible. They followed Senna through the forest, moving slowly to accommodate Cassian's injuries. Despite his obvious pain, he refused any assistance, his jaw set in a determined line that dared anyone to mention his weakness. Elara stayed close, watching for signs that he might collapse, ready to insist on rest if his condition deteriorated further. The journey to Senna's companions took twice as long as it should have. By the time they reached the small clearing where 3 wolves waited with horses, the sun was beginning to rise. The wolves, 2 men and a woman, dropped to their knees at the sight of their Alpha King. My lord, the elder of the men said, his voice thick with emotion. We feared you lost. It will take more than my uncle's treachery to end my reign, Cassian replied, his voice steady despite the pain Elara knew he must be feeling. Rise, we have little time for formalities. As the others prepared the horses, Senna pulled Elara aside. You are not what I expected, she said quietly. What did you expect? Lyria spoke of a gentle girl, shy and uncertain. You seem changed. Elara thought of the frightened child she had been, cast out for being different. 10 years alone will do that. A person becomes hard or dies. I chose hard. Senna's eyes softened. What happened to Lyria, you should know. My daughter died protecting a young Omega who showed signs of the same condition you have. Thornwood wanted to exile the child as he did you. Lyria stood against him. Anger flashed hot in Elara's chest. She was his own daughter. He struck her down before the entire pack for her defiance. Senna's voice held a fury carefully controlled. When 2 seasons passed after her death, I could no longer stay. Others felt the same. We joined the king's court, hoping to eventually change the laws that give alphas like Thornwood such unchecked power. Her gaze drifted to Cassian, and now everything hangs by a thread. Elara followed her gaze. Cassian stood with his loyal wolves, issuing quiet commands despite his weakened state. There was something compelling about him, not just his physical power or his position, but a core of integrity that shone through even in this dire situation. He is a good king, then? Elara asked softly. The best in generations, Senna answered without hesitation. He has worked to reform the old ways, to create more protection for lower-ranked wolves, especially Omegas. She gave Elara a significant look. It is why Valdis moved against him. The old guard fears change. The information settled like a weight on Elara's shoulders. This was not just about one wolf's claim to power. It was about the future of all wolves like her. The possibility of a world where being different did not mean exile or death. Cassian approached, his movements carefully controlled to hide his pain. "We need to move. Valdis will have sentries posted on all the main roads to the north. There is another way," Elara found herself saying. "Through the Valewood Hollows. No wolf patrols there." "For good reason," Senna said sharply. "Those valleys are cursed. Wolves who enter rarely return." "I have foraged there for years," Elara countered. "The dangers are real, but manageable if you know the paths." Cassian studied her, his amber eyes thoughtful. "You would guide us." The pendant at her throat seemed to warm against her skin, her grandmother's words echoing in her mind. "Your strength lies where others perceive weakness." Perhaps this was what she had meant, that her years of solitary exile had taught her to navigate places other wolves feared, giving her knowledge they lacked. "I would," Elara said, meeting his gaze steadily. A smile touched his lips, the first real smile she had seen from him. It transformed his face, hinting at the man he might be in times of peace. "Then it seems, little healer, that fate brought you to my door for more reasons than one." As they mounted the horses, Cassian insisting Elara ride with him so she could monitor his condition, she felt a shift in the world around her. For 10 years, she had lived on the edges of werewolf society, believing her place there was deserved punishment for being born wrong. Now, with the weight of an alpha king's trust on her shoulders and the future of her kind possibly hanging in the balance, she wondered if her exile had been preparing her all along for this moment, this chance to redefine what an Omega could be. The Valewood Hollows lived up to their name. By late afternoon, they were engulfed in swirling fog that turned the towering pines into ghostly sentinels and muffled the sounds of their passage. The air here was different, heavier, charged with an ancient energy that made the horses nervous and set the wolves on edge. "Stay close," Elara called softly over her shoulder to their small company. "The path narrows ahead, and there are sinkholes on either side." She felt Cassian's arms tighten around her waist as he adjusted his position behind her on the horse. Despite his protests, the journey had taken a visible toll on him. The fever from his wounds had risen, and his breathing had grown shallow against her back. Still, he maintained the regal bearing expected of an alpha king, never once complaining or showing weakness before his loyal followers. "How much farther until we can rest?" he asked, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "There is a clearing about an hour ahead," Elara replied just as quietly. "Protected by a ring of rowan trees. The mist does not penetrate there." "Rowan trees," he repeated with a hint of amusement. "Fitting. I thought the same," Elara said. She guided their horse carefully around a fallen log. "The clearing has herbs that will help with your fever." His silence told her more than words could have. The great Alpha King was reaching his limits, though he would die before admitting it to anyone but her. Somehow, in the span of a day, she had become his confidant, the only one he would allow to see his vulnerability. Behind them, Senna and the 3 loyal wolves, TK the young one, Aldrich the grizzled veteran, and Mira the fierce warrior, followed in single file. They had accepted her leadership through the valleys with minimal resistance, though Elara caught occasional glances exchanged between them. Uncertainty about trusting their king's life to an exiled Omega with a questionable reputation. "Tell me about this curse," Cassian said, breaking the silence as they navigated a particularly narrow stretch of path. "What keeps other wolves away from these valleys?" Elara considered how to explain. "It is not one curse, but many." The Valewood Hollows sit at the intersection of old ley lines, channels of wild magic. Strange things happen here. Time moves differently in some places. Nightmares become visible in others. She pointed to a cluster of crystalline formations growing from a nearby tree trunk. "Those are dream shards. They capture the dreams of anything that sleeps near them." Cassian studied the glittering crystals with interest. "And you have survived here alone." "The valleys do not harm those who respect them," Elara said. She touched the pendant at her throat. "My grandmother taught me about the old magics before I was exiled. She said they respond to intention and attitude more than strength or status." "Your grandmother sounds like a wise woman." She was. The familiar ache of loss tightened Elara's chest. She died the winter before my exile. Sometimes I wonder if she knew what was coming. If that is why she gave me this pendant and taught me the old ways. The quiet ones see what others miss, Cassian murmured, surprising her by quoting the very words her grandmother had spoken. When Elara twisted to look back at him, he added, "You whispered it last night while tending my wounds. I remember everything you said, even through the pain." Heat rose to her cheeks at the thought of what else she might have said during that long, stressful night. Before she could respond, a sharp whistle came from behind them. Senna's warning signal. Elara reined in their horse, motioning for silence. Through the mist, dark shapes moved parallel to their path. At least 5 of them, large and low to the ground. Not wolves, but something else. Something that stalked with deliberate, patient hunger. "Mist panthers," Elara breathed. "Do not run. They chase anything that flees." The loyal wolves had already dismounted, positioning themselves protectively around Cassian's horse. Their bodies tensed, ready to shift forms at the first sign of attack. But Cassian's hand on Elara's arm stopped her from giving the order to defend. "No," he said, his voice carrying quiet authority. "In your valley, we follow your lead." Elara nodded, slipping from the horse and approaching the nearest shadowy form with slow, measured steps. The mist panther emerged partially from the fog, larger than any natural big cat. Its fur seemed woven from the mist itself, and its eyes glowed with an inner phosphorescence that marked it as something far more than animal. "We seek safe passage," Elara said clearly, maintaining eye contact with the creature. "We honor the old ways and mean no harm to the valleys or their guardians." The panther's gaze shifted from her to Cassian, who had remained on the horse despite his wounds. It made a low sound in its throat, not quite a growl, more like the rumble of distant thunder. Then it spoke. "Blood wounded," it said in a voice like rustling leaves. "Death marked. Why should we permit passage to those already claimed by the grave?" The sound of an animal speaking in human words sent shock rippling through their small company. Mist panthers were known in legend to be intelligent, but few had ever heard them speak. Fewer still had lived to tell of it. Behind Elara, she sensed Cassian straightening on the horse, gathering his dignity despite his weakness. "I am Cassian, Alpha King of the North March territories," he declared, "and I will not die this day." The panther's misty form seemed to ripple with something like amusement. "Bold claim, Wolf King, but we smell the silver in your blood, smell the death that follows you. Give us reason we should not simply wait for you to fall and feast on what remains." Elara's hand went instinctively to the pouch of herbs at her belt, but she knew no medicine would matter if the panthers decided to attack. She needed to negotiate, to find what would matter to such ancient beings. "Because balance must be restored," Elara said finally. "The usurper who wounded him seeks to return the wolf packs to the old tyrannies, alphas with unchecked power, omegas and lower wolves treated as disposable. This king works for a different future." The panther was still for a long moment, its misty form undulating slightly in the breeze. Then it turned its head toward the shadows where its companions waited. A series of low growls and rumbles followed, a conversation she could not interpret. Finally, it looked back at her. "Your words carry the weight of truth, little Omega. But truth alone does not earn passage. It earns the right to be tested." The panther's eyes fixed on Cassian. "You claim you will not die, Wolf King. Prove it. Face me, wounded as you are. Show us your will to survive." The challenge hung in the mist between them. Every wolf present understood what was being asked. A blood trial. Combat against an opponent when victory was impossible. The point was not to win, but to demonstrate that even facing certain death, the warrior would not yield. Cassian dismounted, his movements betraying the cost of his injuries. He swayed, caught himself, and stood firm. He was naked, save for the crude bandages Elara had wrapped around his worst wounds. Against the massive panther, he looked almost fragile. But his eyes burned with that amber fire. "I accept your trial," he said. The panther moved like liquid shadow, impossibly fast. It was upon Cassian before he could react, bearing him to the ground with bone-crushing force. Claws raked his side, opening fresh wounds. Jaws snapped inches from his throat. Cassian rolled, pure instinct overriding pain and exhaustion. He came up in a crouch, blood streaming down his torso. The panther circled, taking its time. This was not a hunt. This was an evaluation. It struck again. Cassian tried to dodge, but his injured leg betrayed him. He went down hard, the panther's weight crushing the air from his lungs. This time the jaws closed on his shoulder, piercing deep. Cassian screamed. Elara took a step forward, but Senna's hand caught her arm. "This is his trial," the older woman said quietly. "We cannot interfere." The panther released him and backed away. Cassian lay gasping, struggling to rise. His body was failing, pushed beyond its limits, but he got his hands under him, pushed, made it to his knees. The panther knocked him flat again with one massive paw. Cassian crawled forward, reaching for a fallen branch he could use as a weapon. The panther's paw came down on his back, pinning him. He could not breathe, could not move, but his hand still stretched toward that branch. 6 times the panther knocked him down. 6 times Cassian got back up, or tried to. Each time slower, each time weaker. Blood pooled beneath him now, more than Elara had thought a body could lose and still function. The 7th time, Cassian did not get up. He lay face down in the frost and dead leaves, his hand still extended toward the branch he would never reach. The panther placed one massive paw on the back of his head. "Enough," it said. "You have earned passage." Elara was already running to Cassian's side, her medical kit in hand. The others followed, TK and Aldrich helping to carefully turn the king onto his back. His breathing was shallow, his heartbeat erratic. He had reopened every wound Elara had spent the night closing. But his eyes opened, fixed on hers, and incredibly, impossibly, he smiled. "Did I pass?" he whispered. "You stubborn fool," Elara said, her hands already working to stop the bleeding. "You nearly killed yourself." But I passed. She wanted to berate him, wanted to scream at him for taking such a risk when he was already so close to death. But she understood why he had done it. For his wolves to see their king fight, for his enemies to know he was not defeated, and perhaps for himself to prove he still had the will to stand. The panther watched as Elara worked. "The Rowan clearing lies ahead," it said, nodding toward a path that had not been visible before. "We will allow passage until moonrise tomorrow. After that, you are prey like any other who enters our domain." "Thank you," Elara said, bowing her head slightly in respect. The panthers melted back into the mist, leaving them alone with their wounded king and the knowledge that they had less than a day to cross the most dangerous part of the Valewood Hollows. As they prepared to move Cassian onto a makeshift stretcher, Elara felt the full weight of what she had taken on. This was not just about guiding a few wolves through cursed valleys. This was about keeping the Alpha King alive long enough to reclaim his throne, about protecting a child held hostage, about changing the future for every wolf who had ever been deemed lesser. The pendant at her throat pulsed with warmth, and she remembered her grandmother's final words, "Your strength lies where others perceive weakness." Perhaps she was beginning to understand what that meant. The Rowan clearing appeared as they rounded a bend, a perfect circle of level ground surrounded by slender trees with distinctive red berries. True to its reputation, the mist stopped abruptly at the tree line, held back by invisible barriers. The late afternoon sun broke through here, bathing the clearing in golden light that felt almost magical after hours in the fog. "We will make camp here," Elara announced, helping Aldrich and TK carefully lower Cassian's stretcher. "His fever has worsened. He needs rest and aggressive treatment, or he will not survive the night." Senna and the others moved quickly to create a makeshift camp. A fire was started. Horses were tended. A perimeter was established. While they worked, Elara knelt beside Cassian and began the brutal work of saving him one more time. This time, she would not fail. The night pressed down on the Rowan clearing like a living thing. Elara worked by firelight, her hands moving with the desperate precision of someone who knew she was fighting death itself. Cassian's skin had taken on a grayish cast, the telltale sign that silver poisoning was spreading through his system faster than his werewolf healing could compensate. Around his worst wound, the one where the blade had pierced between his ribs, dark veins spread like the roots of some poisonous tree. She had seen this before in animals who had encountered silver traps. Without aggressive intervention, he would be dead by morning. The herbs she needed grew in abundance around the clearing's edge. Moonflower with its pale, luminescent petals, wolfsbane, ironically named, which in controlled doses could purge toxins, and the rarest of all, a fungus that grew only on the bark of rowan trees, its surface covered in tiny crystalline growths that caught and held moonlight. She ground them together in a stone mortar, adding her own blood to bind the mixture. Warrior Omega blood, she had learned in these past hours, carried properties that normal Omega blood did not. It could accelerate healing when applied correctly or kill when weaponized. Her grandmother had known this, had taught her the basics before death claimed her. But Elara was improvising now, working from instinct as much as knowledge. "This will be unpleasant," she warned as she knelt beside Cassian. "The remedy for silver poisoning is aggressive. It will feel like fire in your veins." His eyes opened, fever bright but still aware. "Do what you must," he said. His voice was barely a whisper. "I have endured worse." Elara applied the poultice directly to the wound. For a moment nothing happened. Then Cassian's entire body went rigid. A sound escaped him that was barely human, a mixture of scream and howl and something darker. Every muscle in his powerful frame locked tight. His back arced off the makeshift bed. Blood vessels burst in his eyes, turning the whites crimson. Elara placed her hand over his heart, directly on his bare chest. "Breathe," she commanded. "Focus on my voice. Find the center beneath the pain." To her surprise, the strange, warm current she had felt before began to flow from her palm into his body. But this time it was different, stronger, more controlled. She could feel it moving through him, following his circulatory system, seeking out the silver contamination and binding to it. The gray cast began to fade from his skin. The dark veins receded. His breathing, which had been shallow and erratic, began to steady and deepen. Color returned to his face, though calling it healthy would have been generous. He looked like a man who had been pulled back from death's door, which was exactly what he was. "You are doing it again," Cassian said when he could speak. "The Omega gift, but stronger this time, more focused." Elara kept her hand in place, maintaining the flow of healing energy. "I do not understand how. I have never been able to do this before, not in 10 years of trying. Perhaps you needed the right wolf," he suggested, his fingers wrapping gently around her wrist. "Or perhaps you were never defective at all, just different, waiting for the right moment to bloom." The possibility was too large to process, that she had carried this ability all along, that her exile had been based on a fundamental misunderstanding of her nature, that every moment of shame and rejection had been built on a lie. She focused instead on maintaining the connection, allowing the soothing energy to flow between them as she completed the treatment. By the time she finished wrapping fresh bandages around his torso, night had fully fallen. The others had built a fire at the center of the clearing and were keeping a respectful distance, though she could feel their curious glances. Senna approached with a cup of broth. "You should eat," she said, her tone gentle. "You have used much energy." Elara accepted the cup gratefully, suddenly aware of how exhausted she felt. The Omega scream earlier, followed by the healing work, had drained her more than any physical labor ever had. Her hands trembled slightly as she raised the cup to her lips. Senna settled beside her, her gaze moving between Elara and the sleeping king. "I saw what happened," she said quietly. "The calming touch, the healing energy flowing visible between you." "I do not know how I did it," Elara admitted. "Perhaps you never had reason to try before," Senna suggested. "Or perhaps your gift was always meant for him specifically." Elara looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" "There are old stories among our kind," Senna continued, her voice taking on the cadence of someone sharing ancient lore, "about wolves whose abilities only manifest in the presence of their true mates, bonds that transcend pack and status, connections written in blood and fate." Heat flooded Elara's face. "That is ridiculous. He is the Alpha King. I am an exiled Omega with abilities I barely understand. Besides, we have known each other less than a day." "And yet you risked everything to save him," Senna observed. "And he trusts you more than wolves he has known for years. The old magics care nothing for time or status. They recognize patterns we cannot see with ordinary eyes." Before Elara could formulate a response, a low growl came from the edge of the clearing. TK, the youngest of their group, stood tensely at the perimeter, staring into the mist beyond the rowan trees. "Something is coming," he warned, his hand moving to the sword at his belt. "Multiple somethings." Elara rose, moving to stand beside him. Through gaps in the mist, she caught glimpses of movement, too organized to be animals, too deliberate to be random travelers. And there were many of them, at least 30, perhaps more. "Valdis's hunters," Senna breathed, joining them. "But how did they find us? The Valewood should have thrown off any trail." Elara's mind raced through possibilities. The Mist Panthers had granted them passage until moonrise tomorrow. These hunters would not dare enter Panther territory without knowing exactly where their prey was hiding, which meant someone had told them. Unless they were led here, Elara said slowly, the realization forming as she spoke. Unless someone who knew this place guided them. Senna's face went pale. No, she would not. But even as she said it, a figure emerged from the mist. An older woman, walking with purpose toward the clearing. Elara recognized her even before she stepped into the firelight. It was Senna's own reflection, 20 years older. Her mother. The woman she had mentioned only in passing. The one who had sworn to never forgive the king for the reforms that had cost them their traditional privileges. "Hello, daughter," the woman said. Her voice carried across the clearing with cold clarity. "I am sorry it has come to this." "Mother," Senna whispered, "what have you done?" "What I had to do." The old woman's expression was hard as stone. "Valdis has your daughter, my granddaughter. He will kill her if I do not deliver the false king's location." The words hit like physical blows. Senna had a daughter, had never mentioned her, and now that child was a hostage, her life traded for betrayal. "So you sacrificed the kingdom to save one child," Elara said, stepping forward. "You condemn thousands to save one." The old woman's eyes fixed on Elara with venom. "Do not presume to lecture me, exile. You know nothing of what it means to choose between those you love. I have already lost one granddaughter. I will not lose another." Behind them, Cassian had woken. Despite his wounds, despite the trauma of the past day, he rose and walked to join them at the clearing's edge. His presence changed the dynamic immediately. Even wounded, even outnumbered, an Alpha King commanded respect simply by existing. "You could have come to me," he said to Senna's mother. "I would have helped you rescue your granddaughter. That is what kings do. They protect their people." The old woman laughed, bitter and broken. "Pretty words. But Valdis has 200 warriors. You have 6. What protection could you possibly offer?" "More than you gave yourself when you chose betrayal," Cassian replied. His voice carried the weight of judgment. "How long did it take before you sold us? How long before you went to Valdis and offered him my location in exchange for one child's life?" "Since the moment my daughter joined your doomed cause," the old woman spat. "Did you think I would not follow? Did you think I would not ensure I had leverage when your foolish rebellion collapsed?" Elara felt something shift in the air. A tension building. Senna stood frozen between her mother and her king, caught in an impossible choice. "I am sorry," Senna said finally. The words were directed at Cassian, but her eyes were on her mother. "I did not know she followed us, did not know she would do this." "You do not have to apologize for her choices," Cassian said gently. "We all carry the weight of our blood, but we are not defined by it." "How touching," Senna's mother said. "The doomed king offers absolution while his enemies close in. Tell me, will your pretty speeches stop Valdis's hunters? Will your reforms matter when you are dead?" As if summoned by her words, shapes began to emerge from the mist. Wolves in both forms, human and animal. 30 at least, as Elara had estimated, perhaps more still hidden in the fog. They formed a loose circle around the clearing, just beyond the rowan tree's protection. A voice called out from the darkness. "Cassian, so-called Alpha King, we know you are in there. Surrender now and your companions will be spared. Resist and we kill everyone." The voice was male, cultured, carrying the authority of high rank. Not Valdis himself, but someone close to him. Someone used to being obeyed. Cassian moved to the edge of the clearing, standing where the firelight would illuminate him. "I am here," he called back, "and I am listening." "Good," the voice replied. A figure separated itself from the mist. A man, perhaps 50 years old, built like a warrior but carrying himself like nobility. His eyes, when they caught the firelight, were cold and calculating. "I am Drayson, general of Valdis's armies. I come with a message from your uncle." "Speak your message, then." "It is simple. Valdis holds your son. Surrender yourself before dawn, and the boy lives. Resist, and he dies screaming while you listen." The cruelty of the offer hung in the air between them. Around the clearing, Elara could feel the loyal wolves tense. This was a trap. Everyone knew it was a trap, but it was also leverage that could not be ignored. "How do I know my son still lives?" Cassian asked, his voice carefully neutral. "Because Valdis is not wasteful," Drayson replied. "The boy has value as long as he can be used against you. But that value has limits. Valdis grows impatient. He wants this rebellion crushed before word spreads to the other territories, before allies who might support your cause learn you still live. Cassian was silent for a long moment. Elara could see him calculating odds, running through scenarios in his mind. The Alpha King was also a tactician. He would not simply surrender to save his son if it meant dooming everyone who had fought for his cause. "I need proof of life," Cassian said finally. "Bring my son where I can see him. Let me know he is unharmed. Then we will discuss terms." Drayson smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. "How do I know you will not simply attack when we bring the boy close?" "You have my word as Alpha King." "Your word," Drayson repeated mockingly. "The word of a king with no kingdom. The word of a wolf who could not protect his own mate from assassination. Forgive me if I find that insufficient." "Then we have nothing to discuss," Cassian said, turning to walk away. "Wait." Cassian paused but did not turn back. "Dawn," Drayson said. "We will bring the boy to the edge of the clearing at dawn. You will see him. Confirm he lives. Then you will surrender or he dies." "I will consider your offer," Cassian replied. "Now leave my sight before I forget the mercy that stays my hand." Drayson withdrew into the mist, his warriors following. But Elara knew they were not leaving. They were simply pulling back to a safer distance. Come dawn, they would return. And then the choice would have to be made. When the last of them had disappeared, Cassian's shoulders sagged. The brief show of strength had cost him dearly. Elara moved to support him, and he did not refuse the help this time. "We cannot surrender," Senna said quietly. "It is a trap. They will kill you both." "I know," Cassian replied. "But neither can I let my son die. He is 6 years old, innocent in all of this. He has already lost his mother. I will not abandon him to Valdis's mercy." "Then we need another option," Elara said. She guided Cassian back to his bedroll, her mind already working through possibilities. The pendant at her throat had grown warm again, almost hot against her skin, a sign that had become familiar over the past day, a signal that the old magic was paying attention. "What if we do not wait for dawn?" she suggested. "What if we bring the fight to them first?" 6 against 30? Aldrich asked. "That is suicide, not tactics." "Not if we use the terrain," Elara countered. "The Valewood is dangerous for them. They do not know its paths or its guardians. But I do." She moved to the fire, using a stick to draw in the dirt. "The clearing is here. Drayson's forces are spread out in a perimeter. They expect us to either surrender or try to break through their line. What they do not expect is for us to use the Valewood itself as a weapon." "Explain," Cassian said. He had propped himself against a tree, conserving his strength, but his eyes were sharp, focused. This was the military commander, not the wounded refugee. "Time distortion zones," Elara began. "I passed 3 of them on the way here. Places where an hour can become a day, or a day becomes an hour. If we can lure their forces into those zones while avoiding them ourselves, we split them up, disorient them." "And the Mist Panthers?" Senna asked. "Respect the old ways," Elara replied. "They granted us passage. They said nothing about our enemies. If Drayson's wolves violate the protocols, the Panthers will handle them." "It is risky," Mira observed, "but better than certain death." Cassian studied the crude map Elara had drawn. "You would need to guide them, lead them into traps while protecting yourself. That requires moving through the Valewood alone." "Not alone," Elara corrected, "with you." "Absolutely not," Cassian said. "I can barely stand." "Which is exactly why it will work," Elara argued. "They want you. They will follow you specifically. If I can keep you alive and moving, I can lead them wherever I want." "She is right," Aldrich said slowly. The old warrior had been silent until now, watching the exchange. "It is the only tactical advantage we have. Use the enemy's objective against them." Cassian's jaw tightened. "I do not like it." "You do not have to like it," Elara said. "You just have to trust me." Their eyes met across the firelight. In that moment, something passed between them. An understanding that went beyond words, beyond logic. She was asking him to put his life, his son's life, the future of his kingdom, into the hands of an Omega who had been exiled as defective, and he was going to do it. "I trust you," he said simply, "more than anyone." The plan took shape over the next hour. Senna and the loyal wolves would create a diversion at the clearing's south edge, make noise, draw attention. While the enemy focused there, Cassian and Elara would slip out the north side and move deeper into the Valewood. Their goal was not escape. It was to use the forest's dangers to thin the enemy forces, Lead them into time distortion zones, past dream shard trees that would trap their minds, through territories where mist panthers hunted, and if they were very lucky, create enough chaos that they could circle back, find where Theron was being held, and extract the boy before dawn. It was insane. It was desperate. It would probably get them all killed, but it was the only option they had. As they prepared, Elara pulled Senna aside. "Your mother," she said quietly. "What will you do?" Senna's face was a mask of pain. She made her choice. "I cannot unmake it for her. When this is over, if we survive, I will find my daughter and get her to safety. But I will not betray my king for family. Some things are larger than blood." Elara thought of her own parents, who had turned their backs when she needed them most. Thought of Lyria, who had chosen principle over survival. Sometimes family was not about blood at all. It was about who stood with you when everything fell apart. 2 hours before dawn, they put their plan into motion. Senna and the others began their diversion, shouting challenges, building up the fire until it roared, making it seem like they were preparing for a desperate last stand. Dracen's forces tightened their perimeter, drawn by the noise and light. While attention focused on the south, Elara and Cassian slipped through the rowan trees on the north side. The moment they crossed the threshold, the mist swallowed them whole. Sound became muffled, distance became meaningless. They were in the Valewood proper now, where the old rules applied. Cassian moved better than he had any right to, but Elara could feel him leaning on her more heavily with each step. The healing she had done would keep him alive, but it could not restore his strength overnight. He was running on will and desperation now. Nothing more. Behind them, shouts rose up. Dracen's forces had discovered the deception. Wolves were crashing through the forest, following their scent. At least 20, maybe more. The hunt was on. "This way," Elara whispered, pulling Cassian toward a section of forest where the mist glowed faintly blue. The first-time distortion zone. They passed through a wall of cold that made her teeth ache. On the other side, sound changed, became hollow. Their pursuers' voices took on a strange, stretched quality. Time was moving differently here. What felt like seconds to Elara and Cassian would be hours for anyone caught in the distortion. 3 wolves burst through the blue mist behind them. Elara and Cassian kept moving, but the wolves stopped, confused. One of them was screaming, aging visibly. His fur went gray, then white. His body withered. In the space of what was probably 30 seconds of real time, he lived through decades. He died of old age on the forest floor, his companions watching in horror. The other 2 fled back through the blue mist, their howls of terror echoing strangely through the distorted space. 2 down, Cassian murmured. 28 to go. They moved deeper into the Valewood. Elara's pendant grew hotter with each step, almost painful against her skin. The old magic was fully awake now, watching, judging. She could feel its attention like pressure against her mind. A massive tree loomed out of the mist ahead. Its trunk was covered in dream shards, thousands of crystalline growths that glowed with inner light. Each one held a captured dream, a fragment of memory from something that had slept too close. 4 more wolves appeared behind them, young, aggressive, confident in their numbers. They did not recognize the danger until it was too late. Elara pulled Cassian behind the tree. "Do not look directly at the shards," she warned. "Do not let them catch your reflection." The 4 wolves charged around the tree, saw the shards, slowed, mesmerized by the lights. One reached out and touched a crystal. His scream was immediate. He collapsed, trapped in a waking nightmare. His body began to seize. The others tried to help him, touched more shards in the process, and they too fell. Within seconds, all 4 lay on the ground, their eyes open but seeing nothing, locked in prisons of their own worst memories. "They will wake," Elara said quietly, "but not for days, maybe weeks." 6 down, Cassian said. His voice was weaker now. Elara could feel his weight increasing on her shoulder. 22 to go. They kept moving. The forest grew stranger around them, trees that whispered in languages she did not know, clearings where gravity seemed optional, a stream that flowed upward instead of down. This was the deep Valewood, where reality became negotiable. More wolves followed. Some turned back when they saw what happened to their companions. Others pressed on, too focused on their prey to recognize danger. Elara led them through every trap she knew, past patches of ghost moss that drained life energy, through groves where shadows became solid and attacked anything that cast them, around sinkholes that looked like solid ground until weight was applied. With each obstacle, their pursuers thinned. Some died, some fled. Some became lost in parts of the forest where direction ceased to have meaning. By the time the first hints of dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, only 8 wolves still hunted them. And Cassian was nearly finished. He had not complained, had not asked to rest, but his breathing had become labored. His skin was gray again. He was bleeding through his bandages, the exertion reopening wounds. "We need to stop," Elara said. "You need to rest." "No time," Cassian replied. "We have to find Theron before Drayson realizes his forces are decimated. You will die if you keep going." "Then I die." His eyes met hers, fierce despite his weakness. "But I do it moving forward, toward my son, not cowering in the mist." Before Elara could argue, a voice called out from ahead. Not behind them, ahead. "Enough of these games," Drayson said. He stood in a small clearing, torch in hand, and beside him, held by 2 warriors, was a small boy with dark hair and amber eyes. Theron. The boy looked terrified but unharmed. When he saw Cassian emerge from the mist, his face lit up with desperate hope. "Father!" Cassian took a step forward. Elara's hand on his arm stopped him. "It is a trap," she whispered. "I know," he replied, "but I cannot leave him." Drayson smiled. Finally, the great Alpha King abandons his clever tactics for simple paternal love. How touching, and how predictable. He drew a blade. Silver, Elara noted, always silver. "Surrender now," Drayson commanded. "Kneel and submit to Valdis's authority. Do this, and your son lives. Your companions live. This ends cleanly. And if I refuse? Then I cut the boy's throat and we hunt down the rest of your rebels one by one. Your choice, fallen king. Pride or progeny." Cassian swayed on his feet. Elara could feel him trembling, not from weakness, though that was part of it, from rage, from the impossible weight of the choice being forced upon him. "All right," Cassian said finally. "I will surrender, but you will release my son first. Send him to me, then I will kneel." "Do you think me a fool?" Drayson laughed. "You kneel first. Then, if I am feeling merciful, I may let the boy go." The standoff stretched taut as a wire. Elara's mind raced through scenarios. 8 enemy wolves remained. Drayson plus his 2 holding Theron plus 5 more in the surrounding forest. She could feel their positions, sense their readiness. Her pendant was burning now, actually burning, hot enough that she should have released it, but she did not. Instead, she gripped it tighter, feeling the heat spread through her hand, up her arm, into her chest. Power built there. The same power she had used to drop Kyle and her hunters at the cabin. The Omega Scream. But she had been unconscious for hours after that attack. Using it now would likely kill her. But it would save Cassian and Theron. "Do not," Cassian whispered, as if reading her thoughts. "Whatever you are thinking, do not." "I have to," Elara replied. "No." His hand found hers, squeezed weakly. "There is another way." "There is no other way." Cassian looked at her, and in his eyes she saw something that made her breath catch. Not resignation, not despair, but certainty. The look of a man who had made his decision and found peace with it. He stepped forward, away from her support, and dropped to his knees in front of Drayson. "I submit," he said clearly. "I, Cassian, Alpha King of the North March territories, surrender myself to Valdis's authority." Drayson's smile was triumphant. Finally, some wisdom from the reformer. He nodded to his warriors. They released Theron. The boy ran to his father, threw his arms around Cassian's neck. "Father, I knew you would come." "I will always come for you," Cassian said softly. "Always." Drayson approached, blade raised. "This is for the old ways," he said, "for tradition, for the natural order you sought to overturn." The blade descended. It never struck. Something erupted from the mist. Not a wolf, not a panther, something else entirely. A shape that defied description, formed from shadow and starlight and ancient rage. The spirit of the Valewood itself, given form. It moved through Drayson's warriors like wind through wheat. They fell, not killed but removed, transported somewhere else, somewhere the forest deemed appropriate for those who violated its deepest laws. Drayson himself was lifted into the air, held by invisible hands. He screamed as the forest judged him and found him wanting. "You brought war to sacred ground," a voice said. It came from everywhere and nowhere, from the trees and the mist and the earth beneath their feet. You shed blood in places meant for healing. This is forbidden." The spirit turned its attention to Cassian and Theron. The king did not seek violence. He sought only his child. "This is permitted." Then to Elara. "And you, daughter of the old blood, you carry the pendant of the eastern line. You walk the paths with respect. You are welcome here always." The pendant around Elara's neck flared with light. For a moment she saw something impossible. Her grandmother, not as a ghost, but as a memory held in the forest itself, smiling, approving. Then the spirit released Drayson. He fell to the ground, alive but changed. His hair had gone white, his eyes held a haunted quality. Whatever he had seen in the forest's judgment had broken something fundamental in him. "Go," the spirit commanded. "Tell your master that the Veilwood protects those who honor it. Tell him the old powers still watch. Tell him his coup ends in ashes and regret." Drayson fled, stumbling through the mist, his mind shattered. The spirit turned to Cassian one final time. "Rest here, Alpha King. Heal. When dawn comes, you will find the path to the Moonstone Sanctuary clear." The Veilwood has chosen its side in this conflict. Then it was gone, dissolving back into mist and shadow. Cassian collapsed, his son still in his arms. Elara rushed to them, checking his wounds. He was alive, barely, but alive. "Father?" Theron's small voice was frightened. "Father, please wake up." "He will," Elara promised, though she was not certain. "He just needs rest." Behind them, Senna and the loyal wolves emerged from the forest. They had fought their own battle, judging by the blood and exhaustion on their faces, but they had survived. "We need to move him back to the clearing," Senna said. "Get proper medical treatment." Together they carried Cassian back through the Veilwood. The forest parted for them now, the paths clear and safe. Whatever the spirit had done, it had transformed this place from enemy to ally. In the Rowan clearing, Elara worked through what remained of the night, cleaning wounds, applying fresh poultices, using her Omega gift to pour healing energy into Cassian's ravaged body. Theron sat beside his father the entire time, holding his hand, refusing to leave. As dawn broke, Cassian's eyes finally opened. He looked at his son, then at Elara, and smiled. "You saved us," he said again. "The forest saved us," Elara corrected. "I just asked it nicely." Cassian's laugh was weak but genuine. "Remind me to let you handle all future negotiations with ancient powers." Around them, the loyal wolves began preparing for the final leg of their journey, to the Moonstone Sanctuary, to the place where Cassian would formally reclaim his throne, to the beginning of the end of Valdis's coup. But as Elara watched the sunrise paint the clearing in shades of gold and red, she felt the pendant grow warm one final time, a warning, a promise. This victory was temporary, the real battle still lay ahead, and something else was coming, something the pendant's warmth told her would change everything they thought they knew. She looked at Cassian, saw him laughing with his son, and wondered how much time they had before the next crisis struck. Hours? Days? The forest had given them a gift: survival, safety, a moment of peace. She intended to use every second of it, preparing for what came next. They rested one full day in the Rowan clearing, letting Cassian regain enough strength to travel. Even then, the path from the Veilwood to Moonstone Sanctuary should have taken 4 days for a group moving carefully through hostile territory. They made it in 3, driven by urgency and the knowledge that Valdis would not wait idly while his forces regrouped. Cassian's recovery bordered on miraculous. The combination of Elara's healing abilities and the Veilwood spirit's blessing had knitted flesh and bone faster than natural werewolf healing should have allowed. But recovery was not the same as wholeness. Elara could see it in the way he moved, careful and measured, could hear it in the catch of his breath when he thought no one was listening. The Alpha King had been pushed to his absolute limits and beyond. He was functional, he was standing, but he was not ready for war. None of them were ready for what they found when Moonstone Sanctuary finally came into view. The ancient stronghold sat atop a hill of white stone that gave the place its name. Walls that had stood for 1,000 years rose 30 feet high, built by the first werewolf kingdoms using techniques long forgotten. The sanctuary was supposed to be neutral ground, sacred space where no violence could occur without invoking the wrath of the ancestors themselves. But the walls were blackened with soot, the gates hung broken on their hinges, and the banners flying from the battlements were not the silver and blue of the royal house. They were red and black, Valdis's colors. "The sanctuary has fallen," Senna whispered. Her face had gone pale. If Valdis controls the sacred ground, he can perform his own coronation, claim legitimacy through the old rituals. "How many defenders were here?" Cassian asked. His voice was quiet, controlled, but Elara heard the rage beneath it. 40, maybe 50 loyal wolves, Aldrich replied. The old warrior had scouted ahead while the others rested. Valdis has at least 200 surrounding the place. They have been under siege for days. I saw bodies on the walls. Cassian was silent for a long moment. Then he turned to face his small group. 6 warriors plus himself, Elara, and Theron, against 200 of Valdis's best. The numbers were impossible. The situation was hopeless. Every tactical assessment said they should retreat, live to fight another day, build their forces slowly and methodically. But Cassian did not retreat. He never had. "We go in," he said simply. "My king," Senna began, "we cannot possibly succeed." "Success is not measured only in victory," Cassian replied. "Sometimes it is measured in the attempt itself, in standing when standing seems impossible." His eyes swept across them all. "I will not abandon wolves who held the sanctuary in my name. I will not let Valdis desecrate sacred ground unopposed. And I will not teach my son that principle can be set aside when circumstances become difficult." Theron, sitting beside his father, looked up with fierce pride. "I will fight with you." "No," Cassian said gently but firmly. "You will stay with Elara. If I fall, she will get you to safety. She will make sure you survive to reclaim your birthright when you are older." "But father," Theron protested. "This is not a request. It is a command from your king." The boy subsided, though his eyes remained bright with unshed tears. Elara moved to Cassian's side. "There has to be another way, some strategy beyond a frontal assault." "There is," Cassian said. He gestured for them to gather close. "The sanctuary has 3 entrances. The main gate, which is destroyed, the water gate, which leads to the underground cistern, and the sanctuary itself, the inner temple where the rite of sovereign blood can be performed. That chamber has its own entrance, a cave system that runs through the mountain beneath." "You want to enter through the caves," Aldrich said, understanding dawning. "Bypass the siege entirely." "Exactly." Cassian sketched a rough map in the dirt. "The caves are ancient, dangerous, but they are also sacred space in their own right. Valdis cannot post guards there without risking the ancestors' displeasure. If we can reach the sanctuary chamber and complete the rite, it will send a call to every wolf of royal blood, a summons they cannot refuse or resist." "Including Valdis," Senna finished. "Including Valdis. And on sacred ground with the ancestors as witness, his coup ends, one way or another." It was a desperate plan. It required entering dangerous caves, navigating unknown passages, all while Cassian was still recovering from injuries that would have killed any normal wolf. But it was also the only plan that had any chance of success. They approached the caves at twilight. The entrance was hidden behind a waterfall, exactly as the old texts had described. The sound of cascading water would mask their entry. The spray would wash away their scent. If they were careful, if they were lucky, they could reach the sanctuary chamber before Valdis even knew they were inside. "Theron, stay close to me," Elara said as they prepared to enter. "Do not wander. Do not touch anything. These caves are as dangerous as the Valewood in their own way." "I understand," the boy replied. His hand found hers, small and trusting. "Will father be all right?" Elara looked at Cassian, saw him checking weapons with Senna and the others. "He will do what he always does, fight until there is nothing left to fight for, and then fight some more." "Is that why you love him?" The question, delivered with the casual directness of childhood, stopped Elara cold. "I do not," she began, then paused. The denial died on her lips because she realized it was a lie. Somewhere between finding him dying in her forest and watching him risk everything for his son, something had changed, had deepened, had become undeniable. "Yes," she said finally, "that is why." Theron nodded as if this confirmed something he already knew. "Mother used to say that father would find someone who understood him, someone who could stand beside him instead of behind him. I think she meant you." "Your mother was wise," Elara managed. Her throat felt tight. "She was," Theron agreed. "And she would be glad you found him, that you saved him, that you make him smile even when everything is terrible." Before Elara could respond, Cassian called them forward. It was time. The caves were everything the legends had promised, beautiful and deadly in equal measure. Phosphorescent fungi lit their path with ghostly blue light. Underground rivers cut through stone chambers large enough to hold entire packs. And everywhere, carved into the walls, were symbols from the first werewolf kingdoms. Treaties and proclamations, birth records and death rites, the entire history of their people preserved in stone. But beauty could not disguise danger. The caves were a labyrinth. Passages split and rejoined in patterns that defied mapping. Several times they had to backtrack when a route proved impassable or unstable, and always there was the sound of water, echoing strangely, making it impossible to judge distance or direction. "We are being followed," Aldrich said quietly after they had been walking for an hour. Elara had felt it too, a presence behind them, not hostile exactly, but watchful, evaluating. She touched her pendant and felt warmth. The old magic again, she realized. The caves themselves were aware of their passage. "Keep moving," Cassian ordered. "Whatever watches us has not attacked. That means we are not yet deemed a threat to this place." "Or it means we are being herded," Mira countered. She was right, but there was nothing to be done about it. They had committed to this path. Retreat was not an option. The passage opened suddenly into a massive chamber. The ceiling soared 100 feet above them, lost in shadow. In the center of the chamber stood a stone platform, and on that platform lay bodies, dozens of them. Wolves in both forms, twisted in death, their faces frozen in expressions of terror. "What happened here?" TK whispered. "They sought the sanctuary chamber," Cassian replied. His voice echoed strangely in the vast space. "But they were not worthy. The caves rejected them." "How do we know we will not end up like them?" Senna asked. "We do not," Cassian admitted. "But we have something they did not." He looked at Elara. "We have someone who carries the blessing of the old magic. Someone the Valewood itself called Daughter of the Old Blood." Elara felt every eye turn to her. The weight of their hope and fear pressed down like physical force. "You think my grandmother's pendant will protect us?" "I think you will protect us," Cassian replied, "as you have from the beginning. The pendant is a tool. You are the key." He was asking her to lead them through a place that had killed dozens of more experienced wolves, to trust in abilities she barely understood, to stake all their lives on the belief that being exiled and broken had somehow prepared her for exactly this moment. "The quiet ones see what others miss," Elara murmured. Her grandmother's words, worn smooth by repetition. "Your strength lies where others perceive weakness." She stepped forward onto the platform, moving carefully between the bodies. The pendant grew hot against her skin. Not painful, but insistent, directing. She followed its guidance, and the others followed her. The chamber had 12 passages leading out. 11 were carved with symbols of power and glory. Wolves triumphant, packs united, kings crowned in majesty. But the 12th passage was plain, unmarked except for a single symbol so worn it was almost invisible, an omega sign. "This way," Elara said, pointing to the humble passage. "But that cannot be right," Aldrich protested. "The sanctuary chamber is supposed to be grand, sacred. That passage looks like a servant's entrance." "Exactly," Elara replied. She thought of her exile, her years of rejection, the way power always seemed to flow through the obvious channels, while truth traveled hidden paths. The sanctuary is not meant for those who seek glory. It is meant for those who serve, for those who understand that leadership is burden, not privilege. She stepped into the 12th passage. The moment she crossed the threshold, the pendant flared with brilliant blue light. The passage ahead illuminated, revealing stairs that descended deep into the mountain's heart. Behind her, she heard Cassian's quiet laugh. Of course. All this time the path was hidden in plain sight, overlooked because it seemed beneath notice. His hand found her shoulder, squeezed gently. "You are full of surprises, Elara of Ashwood." The stairs seemed to go on forever, down and down into darkness broken only by the pendant's light. Theron tired quickly, and Cassian lifted the boy onto his shoulders despite his own exhaustion. Around them, the air grew colder, heavy with age and power. Finally, the stairs ended. They emerged into a circular chamber carved from solid moonstone. The walls glowed with inner light, pulsing like a heartbeat. In the center of the chamber stood an altar, its surface covered in symbols that hurt to look at directly. And above the altar, suspended by no visible means, floated a chalice carved from a single massive sapphire. "The sanctuary chamber," Cassian breathed. "After all this time, it still exists." They had found it. Against impossible odds, through deadly caves, guided by an exiled Omega with a grandmother's pendant, they had reached the heart of werewolf sacred space. Now came the hard part. "We need to prepare the rite," Cassian said. He set Theron down gently and approached the altar, but before they could begin, a voice echoed through the chamber. How touching. The fallen king reaches his destination after all. Figures emerged from passages they had not noticed. A dozen wolves, all armed, all wearing Valdez's colors. And at their center, a man Elara recognized from Cassian's descriptions. Corvus, the beta who had betrayed everything. He was younger than she expected, perhaps 30, built like a warrior, with cold eyes that held no regret for what he had done. "You cannot be here," Cassian said. His voice carried the weight of command and fury. "This is sacred ground. Spilling blood here damns you and all who follow you." "Oh, I am not here to spill blood," Corvus replied. He moved closer, stopping just outside the circle of moonstone's glow. "I am here to witness your failure, to watch as you realize that even reaching this chamber changes nothing." "The rite will send its call," Cassian said. "Valdez will be compelled to answer, and when he does, justice will be served." "Will it?" Corvus smiled. "Tell me, have you asked your little Omega healer about her grandmother's pendant? About where it really came from?" Elara felt ice slide down her spine. "What are you talking about?" Corvus's smile widened. "Morrigan of the Eastern Line. That is what you were told, yes? That she survived the purge and lived in hiding? A lovely story. Convenient. It gave your king hope, made him believe that combining the bloodlines could save his failing reign." "It is the truth," Cassian said, but uncertainty had crept into his voice. "Is it?" Corvus pulled something from his coat. "A scroll, old and yellowed. I found this in Valdez's archives. A letter written by Cassian's own grandfather 50 years ago. Would you like to know what it says?" He unrolled the scroll and read aloud. "The Eastern Line has been eliminated, every member accounted for and executed. The kingdom is unified under single rule. Let no one speak of division again." "Every member," Corvus repeated, looking at Elara, "including a woman named Morrigan, who was personally executed by the king himself. So tell me, exile, who gave you that pendant? Because it certainly was not your grandmother." The words hit like physical blows. Elara's hand went to the pendant, feeling its familiar weight. It had guided her, protected her, led them to this place. But if her grandmother had not been Eastern royalty, if Morrigan had died in the purge, then what was this pendant? And who had given it to her grandmother before she died? "It does not matter," Cassian said firmly. "Whatever the pendant's origin, it has brought us here. And here is where this ends." "Oh, it ends," Corvus agreed. "But not the way you think. You see, the right of sovereign blood requires royal blood. Both Eastern and Western lines united in purpose. But if there is no Eastern line, if it was truly eliminated as my king's grandfather claimed, then the rite cannot be completed. You came all this way for nothing." Elara felt the chamber tilt around her. Everything they had fought for, everyone they had lost, all of it based on a lie, on a hope that her grandmother's pendant carried legitimacy it could not possibly possess. Unless... She looked at the pendant, really looked at it, and saw something she had missed. The moonstone eyes of the silver wolf were not just decoration. They were perfectly matched to the moonstone of this chamber, the same stone, the same source. "This pendant was made here," Elara said slowly, "in this chamber, by someone with access to sacred moonstone." Corvus's smile faltered slightly. "My grandmother was not Eastern royalty," Elara continued, her mind racing through implications. "But she was something else. She was a guardian, someone trusted to protect the sanctuary itself." The pendant flared with light, confirming her words. "Guardians were always Omegas," Cassian said, understanding flooding his face. "They were deemed humble enough to be trusted with sacred spaces, wise enough to know when power should be invoked and when it should remain dormant." "And guardian bloodline is considered equivalent to royal blood," Elara finished, "for purposes of the rite." Corvus's face twisted with rage. "It does not matter. Even if you complete the rite, even if Valdez is compelled to attend, he will bring his entire army. You are still outnumbered, still trapped." "Then we will be trapped together," Cassian replied, "and let the ancestors judge between us." He moved to the altar, gesturing for Elara to join him. She came, bringing Theron with her. The others formed a protective circle around them. Cassian drew a knife. Not silver, but stone, ancient stone that had been placed on this altar thousands of years before. He cut his palm, let 3 drops of blood fall onto the altar. I am Cassian, son of Doran, of the Western royal line. I call upon the ancestors to witness. I claim my right by blood and by deed. He handed the knife to Elara. She hesitated only a moment before cutting her own palm. I am Elara, daughter of forgotten names, of the guardian line. She let her blood fall beside Cassian's. I call upon the ancestors to witness. I claim my right by service and by sacrifice. The 2 pools of blood flowed together on the altar. Where they merged, light erupted. Brilliant, blinding. A pillar of radiance that shot upward through the mountain itself, visible for miles in every direction. The call had gone out. Corvus and his wolves fled. There was nothing else they could do. To remain in the chamber while the rite completed would be to be caught in its power, compelled to kneel, forced to acknowledge Cassian's legitimacy. But they would return, with Valdis, with his army, and then the true battle would begin. We have perhaps an hour, Senna estimated, maybe less if they were already gathering for the siege. Then we make ready, Cassian said. He moved around the chamber, studying its layout with a tactician's eye. This place was built for defense. Single entrance, high ground, limited approach. If we hold here, numbers mean less than they do in open combat. We have 8 fighters, Aldrich pointed out, and a child, against 200. I have fought worse odds, Cassian replied. Then, seeing their expressions, he admitted, All right, I have never fought worse odds, but I have also never fought with the ancestors watching, with sacred ground beneath my feet, with a warrior Omega at my side who can drop entire packs with a scream. He looked at Elara. Can you do it again, the Omega scream? Once, perhaps, she replied, but it will leave me helpless afterward, maybe unconscious. It has to count. Then we save it for when it matters most. Cassian returned his attention to the chamber's layout. Senna, Aldrich, you hold the stairway entrance. Nothing gets past you. Mira, TK, you are our reserves. Strike when openings appear. Elara, you stay back with Theron. Protect him. And when the moment is right, when Valdis himself is in range, you unleash everything you have. It was a plan born of desperation, but it was a plan. They did not have to wait an hour. They did not have to wait even half that long. Within minutes, the sound of boots on stone echoed up from the stairway. Lots of boots, an army descending into the sacred space. Valdis came first. Elara recognized him from Cassian's description. An older version of his nephew, with the same strong features turned cruel by ambition and age. He wore armor of black steel chased with red gold. At his side hung a sword that sang with power, ancient, deadly, a weapon that had ended bloodlines. Behind him came wolves beyond counting. They filled the stairway, packed the passages, more warriors than Elara had ever seen in one place. And at the front, beside Valdis himself, walked Corvus. "Nephew!" Valdis called out. His voice echoed through the chamber with the resonance of command. "You have made this more difficult than it needed to be, but it ends here." "Yes," Cassian replied. "It does. In this chamber, with the ancestors as witness, I challenge your claim. I challenge your right to rule. I challenge everything you have built on treachery and blood." "You challenge?" Valdis laughed. "You stand with 8 wolves against my hundreds and you challenge me? Your arrogance is astounding." "My truth is astounding," Cassian corrected. "You murdered your way to power, poisoned loyal wolves, held a child hostage, desecrated sacred ground with your siege, and still you could not break the spirit of those who believe in something beyond self-interest." "Pretty words," Valdis sneered. "They will not save you." He raised his hand. His army surged forward. What followed was chaos. Senna and Aldrich held the stairway entrance, fighting with the desperate skill of wolves who knew they were already dead. Their blades rose and fell, each strike precise and lethal. Wolves died. More came. The stairway became slick with blood. Mira and TK struck from the flanks, using the chamber's pillars as cover. Hit and fade, wound and withdraw, thinning the attackers where they could. But there were too many, always too many. Cassian fought at this chamber's center, protecting the altar and the blood that still glowed upon it. He moved like a legend given flesh, every motion efficient, every strike deadly. His sword sang as it cut through armor and bone. Wolves fell before him, but they kept coming. Elara stood with Theron behind the altar, watching the slaughter unfold. Her hand was on the pendant, feeling its heat. The power was there, ready to be unleashed. But Valdis had not yet entered the chamber. He stood at the stairway entrance, sending his wolves to die while he watched from safety. He fears the sacred ground, Elara realized. Fears what might happen if he steps fully into this space while the right's power still lingers. "Father!" Theron's scream cut through the chaos. Elara turned to see Corvus had somehow circled around. He was climbing toward them from a passage they had not known existed. His sword was drawn, his eyes fixed on Theron with murderous intent. "If the boy dies, so does Cassian's line," Corvus snarled. "So does any claim to legitimacy." He lunged. Elara moved without thinking. She put herself between Corvus and Theron. His blade cut deep into her shoulder. Pain exploded through her body, but she had bought seconds. Seconds Cassian used to cross the chamber. He slammed into Corvus with the force of pure rage. They went down together, rolling, striking, gouging. Two wolves who had once been brothers in all but blood, now trying to kill each other on sacred ground. The pendant around Elara's neck blazed with light. The wound in her shoulder was serious, possibly fatal. She could feel blood pumping out with each heartbeat, could feel consciousness fading. But she could also feel power, rising from deep within her, not the Omega scream, something else, something older. "The guardian gift," a voice whispered in her mind. Not her grandmother's voice, but older, much older. The voice of the sanctuary itself. "You are the heir to the Omega Guardians, the protectors of sacred space. Call upon that power now." Elara did not know how, had no training, no preparation. But desperation was a teacher like no other. She placed her bleeding hand on the altar, felt the ancient stone drink her blood as it had drunk Cassian's, felt the connection snap into place between herself and this chamber and the mountain and the very bones of the earth beneath. Then she spoke. Not words of her own choosing, but words that flowed through her from the sanctuary itself. "By blood and stone, by oath and sacrifice, I invoke the judgment of the ancestors. Let those who have violated sacred law stand marked for all to see." Light exploded from the altar, not the pillar that had announced the rite's completion, but waves that spread outward like ripples on a pond. They washed over everyone in the chamber, over the loyal wolves, who gasped but stood firm, over Cassian, who straightened, feeling strength return to his wounded body, and over Valdis's army. Where the light touched those who had come with treachery in their hearts, it left marks, burning brands that appeared on their skin, symbols that spelled out their crimes in the old language. Betrayer, murderer, oath-breaker, coward. The warriors looked at each other, looked at their own marked flesh, and saw themselves judged and found wanting. Weapons began to fall, wolves began to kneel, not to Cassian, not yet, but in acknowledgement that something larger than mortal politics had just passed judgment. Valdis stood alone at the entrance, unmarked because he had not yet entered the chamber. But his army was marked, his power was broken, and in his eyes, Elara saw the moment he understood he had lost. He could still fight, could still order his warriors to attack despite their brands. Some would obey, enough perhaps to carry the day through sheer numbers. But Valdis did not give that order. Instead, he drew his ancient sword and stepped into the chamber, stepped fully onto sacred ground for the first time, and the moment he did, the compulsion of the rite took hold. His legs buckled. He fell to his knees against his will, forced down by power older than kingdoms, older than pacts, the power of blood and oath and sacred space. "I invoke the old rite," he said through clenched teeth. "Trial by combat. You and I, nephew. Winner takes all." Cassian looked at him for a long moment. Looked at the man who had murdered his mate, kidnapped his son, destroyed his kingdom. Every instinct screamed for blood, for vengeance, for the satisfaction of ending the threat permanently. But he had made a choice in the Valewood, had decided what kind of king he would be. "No," Cassian said quietly. The word fell into silence. No one had expected it. Not Valdis, not the loyal wolves, not even Elara. "You refuse?" Valdis's face twisted with confusion and rage. "You have the advantage. The ancestors have judged in your favor. And you refuse?" "I refuse," Cassian confirmed. "Because this is not about you and me. It is not about personal vengeance or family blood feuds. This is about the future of our people. And that future cannot be built on more killing." He stepped closer to his uncle, close enough that only Valdis could hear his next words clearly. "You murdered my mate. You terrorized my son. You betrayed everything I worked to build, and I will not give you the clean death of combat. You will stand trial. You will face every family you destroyed, every Omega you brutalized, every wolf who suffered under your vision of the old ways. You will face them all and answer for what you have done." Valdis stared at him. Then, incredibly, he laughed. "You are weak, just as I always said, too weak to do what is necessary." "Perhaps," Cassian replied, "or perhaps I am strong enough to choose a different path. We will let history decide." He turned away from his uncle, addressing the chamber at large. "The coup is ended. Those who followed Valdis through fear or ignorance are forgiven. Those who let it will face justice. We will rebuild, we will reform, and we will prove that strength and compassion are not opposites but partners." A cheer rose from the loyal wolves, tentative at first, then growing stronger. And then something remarkable happened. Some of Valdis's own warriors, the ones bearing the lightest brands, joined the cheering. The old order had fallen. A new one was being born. Elara felt hands on her wounded shoulder. Senna had materialized beside her, pressing cloth to the injury to staunch the bleeding. "You need medical attention," Senna said. "That is deep." "Later," Elara replied. "There is still work to do." But the worst was over. Valdis was restrained. His generals surrendered. The sanctuary was secured. As dawn broke over the mountains, painting the moonstone walls in shades of pink and gold, the first day of a new era began. 3 months passed like a dream. The trials were held in the sanctuary chamber, with the ancestors as witness. Some of Valdis's inner circle were executed for their crimes. Most were stripped of rank and sent into exile. Valdis himself was imprisoned for life, his power broken, his name struck from the honorable records. The reforms Cassian had fought for were implemented across all 12 packs. Omega protections became law. Trial systems replaced Alpha Decree. Power was distributed rather than concentrated. And through it all, Elara stood beside him, not as decoration or consort, but as co-ruler. The Omega Queen, they called her, guardian of the sanctuary, voice of the forgotten. It was terrifying. It was exhausting. It was everything she had never imagined her life could be. On a cool autumn evening, 3 months to the day after the sanctuary's reclamation, Elara stood on the battlements watching the sunset. Below in the courtyard, she could see Theron training with wooden swords under Aldrich's supervision. The boy had grown taller, more confident. The trauma of his captivity was fading, replaced by the resilience of youth. Cassian found her there, as he often did when the day's governance was complete. He stood beside her in comfortable silence, watching his son play. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked finally. "Taking that first step to help a dying wolf on your doorstep? You could have let me bleed out. Could have avoided all of this." "Every day," Elara replied. Then, seeing his expression, she smiled. "But I also celebrated every day. You changed my life, gave me purpose beyond mere survival, showed me that being different could be strength rather than shame." "You did that for yourself," Cassian said. "I was just convenient timing." She laughed. "Convenient? The Alpha King calls his own near-death convenient." "Well," he said, a smile playing at his lips, "it did get me excellent medical care, and rather attractive company." "Rather attractive?" Elara raised an eyebrow. "I save your life repeatedly, and I am rather attractive?" Cassian turned to face her fully. His expression grew serious. "You are extraordinary," he said quietly. "You are brave and wise and stronger than anyone I have ever known. You took a broken exile and made her a queen, took a dying king and made him whole. And you did it all while carrying more grace and compassion than I could ever hope to match." His hand found hers. "I am not asking you to be my mate. That is not something that can be commanded or even requested. But I am asking if you might consider the possibility, in time, when you are ready." Elara's breath caught. The bond between them had been growing for months. Everyone could see it. Everyone except perhaps the two of them, too close to recognize what was obvious to outside eyes. "I killed the idea of having a mate when Sarah died," Cassian continued. "Thought I would never open that part of myself again. But you made me remember what hope feels like, what it means to build rather than just survive." Elara looked down at their joined hands, thought about the girl who had been cast out for being defective, about the woman who had learned to survive alone, about the queen who now stood atop the highest walls in the kingdom. "I'm ready now," she said. Cassian's eyes widened. "Now? Why wait?" Elara smiled. "We have faced death together, led armies together, rebuilt a kingdom together. Compared to that, being mates seems almost simple." He kissed her then, soft and slow and full of promise. Below them, she heard Theron cheer, heard the loyal wolves applaud. But she barely noticed. For the first time in 10 years, Elara felt truly home. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Cassian rested his forehead against hers in the wolf gesture of deepest intimacy. "My Omega Queen," he whispered. "My Alpha King," she replied. The sunset painted them in shades of gold and crimson as they stood together above the kingdom they had saved. The pendant at Elara's throat glowed softly, warm with approval. And somewhere, in the spaces between heartbeats, she felt her grandmother smile. "The quiet ones see what others miss," the old voice whispered one final time. "And you, my darling girl, have shown the world that the discarded can become indispensable, that the broken can be the strongest, that the exiled can come home." Below them, the kingdom prepared for the bonding ceremony. Above them, the stars began to emerge, and between them, in the space of a joined heartbeat, a future took shape. A future where strength and compassion walked hand in hand, where alphas and omegas stood as equals, where the old ways evolved into something better. It would not be easy. Change never was. There would be resistance, challenges, setbacks, but they would face them together. King and Queen, Alpha and Omega, two halves of a whole that had been missing for far too long. As darkness fell and the first stars appeared, Elara allowed herself one final thought before duty called her back to the celebration being prepared below. She had been called defective, had been cast out and forgotten, had spent 10 years believing she was less than nothing. But she had been wrong. They had all been wrong. She was not defective. She was exactly what the kingdom needed, exactly when it needed her most. And that made all the difference. The end.